Well, my treasures, once again, I come to you with a book that is a thinly veiled reason to regale you with my personal stories. So, Runescape. It is one of the oldest MMOs, and back in high school when I was on dial-up internet, right as dial-up internet was dying out, it was actually a browser-based game that I could actually play on my shitty AOL connection. So I actually spent quite a bit of time playing RuneScape until a then-boyfriend gave me a CD with the MapleStory installer on it, and I was finally able to run and install that game. So then I spent a lot of time on MapleStory. But then, in college, I made several online friends who regularly played RuneScape while Skyping, so I got back into it, though by that time I think it was RuneScape 2, and it looked totally different than before. And then shortly after I graduated college, I found this book, and I thought, hey, I play RuneScape, maybe I will like this book. Well, I graduated college 10 years ago, and I only finally started reading this book in February. And I actually haven't played RuneScape in quite a while, so what actually happened is I realized I don't remember any RuneScape lore. Obviously, this map looked really familiar, and I even remembered all the place names. I was like, yeah, I know all these places, you know. Well, now I look at it and I'm like, I can't even read. You know, places like Falador and Varrock and... what is even... Oh, there's the monastery. Okay. Anyway, discovering things on camera, making me look super professional, straying from my script, but let's return to it. But like I was saying, you know, the Knights of Falador and the god they worshipped called Saradaman, it rang a bell, but after that, I genuinely cannot tell you how much of this stuff is from the game. They make reference to wizards needing runestones to do magic, which is a basic mechanic of the game, so that made sense, and I think the fire staff that gets used is from the game, but it's also a pretty generic fantasy item, so don't know. I couldn't even properly tell you if the prized metal in this book, known as adamant, is actually from the game. Though I actually assume it is, and I assume a lot of things are, but I specifically did not do any intentional research and wrote this video with only the barest knowledge, because actually I think that represents a lot of people who might be wondering if this book is worth reading for them. People who used to play RuneScape but maybe don't anymore, and maybe don't remember so much of the actual lore of the game. Now, this book is the first in a trilogy, and out of curiosity I did go looking to see how many RuneScape books I could find, and what I found is there is this trilogy, and then I was also able to find that there is a new RuneScape book slated to come out fall of this year, 2023. So that's interesting. I really expected there to be a lot more, like, I feel like there are a lot of, like, World of Warcraft books. There are even dozens and dozens of Minecraft books. I really sort of expected RuneScape, being as, like, richly fantasy as it is, to have more books written about it. But it's this trilogy and a new one that's coming out later this year. And I didn't find anything else. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, means I didn't find it on Amazon. But then pivoting to actually talking about this book, this book is mostly the story of a girl named Karamir, whose family and entire village were killed by the worshippers of the chaos god Zamorak. Please forgive me on these pronunciations, who call themselves the Kinshra. Kara ends up unconscious at the castle of the Knights of Falador due to a ring that her father gave her that transports someone back to the Knight's castle if they fall in battle. Her arrival sets many alliances into motion as the Kinshra begin to cut a path across the kingdom of Asgarnia to siege the city of Falador. Kara is challenged to choose the path that she wishes to follow, as she seems to be destined to be a leader. Now, that is an overly simple synopsis, as the truth is there are unending side stories. There is a man who is trying to fight his nature as a werewolf while being hunted down by a family member who is determined to force him to take his first innocent life. There is a knight named Theodore, who is a close second main character, who feels drawn to stay close to Kara. There is a dwarf who, after having his home burned down by humans, ends up entering the fray on the side of the knights. The narration follows each of these characters individually at different times. Some chapters towards the end of the book are actually split between 4 or 5 characters, getting choppier as you hit the climax, which I assume was sort of to get across the chaos of battle and the fact that all of the events are happening simultaneously, but I actually found myself simply wishing that the book would finish a thought before hopping to the next one. But I stick by saying that this is Kara's story. She is the character linking nearly all the plot threads. She is the one who faces the highest stakes internal conflict. Will she let her anger and hunger for revenge consume her and so fall to chaos, or will she find peace on the side of order? And at the end of the book, it is still Kara's own quest that seems to drive the hook into the next book. Like I said, this is the first book in a trilogy, but while it leaves plenty open-ended for the next part, it also has a satisfying enough ending on its own. I don't currently plan to read the next installment, at least not anytime soon. Here's where I admit that while I liked the book well enough, it was a slog for me to read through. This is a dense, meaty book in the tradition of old fantasy. If you love classic fantasy novels with 10-page battles and constant good versus evil high stakes, you will like this book whether you know anything about Runescape or not. For me, though, I am actually a really slow reader in general, and these just dense dramas can often be a chore for me to actually read through, even if I like the plots and characters. That's why I started reading this in February and didn't finish until May. The story is also just generic fantasy enough that you can kind of guess at the shape of the story, and right now it's satisfying enough for me. I don't need to know for sure. Despite my personal grievance with the jumping around point of view at times, this is well written. The story is structured well and descriptions are very easy to imagine. It is good writing, it's just a little dry in a way. And while I liked the characters, I can't say I attached to any of them in a way that would drive me to read more. Kara, as the cool badass woman, is wonderful, but the next biggest character is Theodore, who is kind of this white bread, good knight type that doesn't particularly endear me to him. He just sort of lacks a certain spark. And certainly Dork the dwarf has some wittiness and spark to him. The good werewolf, Gareth, doesn't speak the same language as the other characters, and while he's clearly on quite the internal journey himself, we don't get to become too familiar with it, as it is not much of the narration coming from his point of view. Castamere, the wizard, and Ebenezer, the alchemist, have a nice little back and forth, but again, their relationship usually falls to the wayside. So usually I would do some sort of blow-by-blow plot summary with commentary in these videos, but if I did that with this book, it would take forever and be just a little bit like torture. Thus far, I've entirely not mentioned the subplot where there is a traitor among the Knights of Falador who works for the Kinshra. There's a monastery that the main characters are visiting that gets attacked, and Kara loses her last chance to find out who her father was. The bad werewolf who is hunting Gareth is at one point scolded for taking too long to find him by someone he simply calls his Dark Master, but it never gets brought back up again, and he instead joins forces with the leader of the Kinshra while continuing to fail to capture Gareth. Nor have I mentioned when Kara and company go to recruit the dwarves to fight the Kinshra when they attack Falador. Literally so much happens in this book. There is a point in the first fourth or so of the book when Theodore is lured to the bad part of Falador by the bad werewolf, and Kara and Doric end up coming to rescue him, that I thought to myself, Well, this really feels like it would be a climax in another book, but there's still hundreds of pages left, so, like, how does this get stretched out? And, like, stretched out it does. It sprawls out. I was only at the very precipice of understanding just how much was going to happen by the end of this book. And yet the timeline seems to be only a couple of months, tops. It's dense. I've used that word so many times, but it truly dense. Like, maybe not Lord of the Rings dense. It's definitely less dry than Tolkien, but it's almost like 500 pages of this teeny tiny text. So packed. So all of those disjointed references are all I'm going to give you on this one. If hearing any of that makes you curious what the heck is going on in this book, I do think it will be a satisfying enough read for you. And as I said before, if you enjoy the dense fantasy genre, this is absolutely worth the read, especially if you're looking for something that's mostly sans romance. I think there's a little something between Kara and Theodore, but given that the Knights of Falador are like a chaste order, it's like a very, it's just not brought up in this novel. It might come into play later, but there's a little bit of something there, but there's not actually any romance. So this is like that very classic, like, sans romance. It does have women in it, mostly Kara, but there are a few other female characters that show up and are women of power, but yeah, like that sort of classic, just all battle, all action kind of stuff is going on here. Point being, that classic style, if you like that, you'll like this. For me, I'm actually just pretty lukewarm on it. I liked it well enough, but I didn't love it, and I do not feel driven to read the sequel. And I think regular viewers know enough about my tastes by now to know if yours and mine align more often than not. And if you aren't a regular viewer, well, I have several reviews on this channel that you can watch to go ahead and check your media barometer against mine. Plug, plug. The thing about putting things on your review schedule and sticking to it before you've even read things is you end up not knowing how much you're gonna have to say about the media that you're addressing. But today we found out. Because that is actually all I have to say today. Clicking the like button is a really great way to give this video a boost if you enjoyed it. Roast me in the comments for not knowing things about RuneScape, and I will see you treasures next time.